A new piece in The Atlantic written by Jonathan Haidt perfectly describes why American political discourse becomes more and more divisive, why American politics continues to be more polarized, and why, as he writes in the headline, why the past 10 years of American life have been uniquely stupid. It's not just a phase. And so it's a lengthy piece, takes about an hour to read, but it's worth the read because I think a lot of what he writes here is true, and it's backed by various studies that he cites. He talks about how social media has played a massive role, but not necessarily social media because of what it is inherently, but rather what it has turned into over the years, how it has prioritized virality and how the desire to market oneself or build one's brand has unfortunately led to a small group of people on both sides of the political spectrum, extreme ends of the political spectrum, essentially dominating the discourse while simultaneously silencing those who want to have a more nuanced discussion about current events and politics. He writes, gradually social media users became more adept at putting on performances and managing their personal brand, activities that might impress others, but that do not deepen friendships in the way that a private phone conversation will. So he also talks about people becoming more atomized as a result of this. Once social media platforms had trained users to spend more time performing and less time connecting, the stage was set for the major transformation, which began in 2009. The intensification of viral dynamics. And he writes about that in great detail. He gives specific examples. For instance, the way the timelines on Facebook and Twitter have changed, where you no longer see the order of posts chronologically, but the posts that have the most engagement, meaning the posts that tend to be a little more shocking, jarring, those are the ones that kind of rise to the top of the feed and dominate the discourse. He also gives the example of Twitter, for instance, adding the retweet option, Facebook adding the like and share options back in 2012. All of these elements of social media, the way that the executives have tinkered with these platforms has led to what we're experiencing today. Just a few more details before I go to you, Cenk. He talks about the dart guns of social media. Give more power to trolls and provocateurs while silencing good citizens. Research by the political scientists Alexander Bohr and Michael Bang-Peterson found that a small subset of people on social media platforms are highly concerned with gaining status and are willing to use aggression to do so. They admit that in their online discussions, they often curse, make fun of their opponents, and get blocked by other users or reported for inappropriate comments. Across 8 studies, Bohr and Peterson found that being online did not make most people more aggressive or hostile. Rather, it allowed a small number of aggressive people to attack a much larger set of victims. Even a small number of jerks were able to dominate discussion forums, Bohr and Peterson found, because non-jerks are easily turned off from online discussions of politics. And look, the consequences of this, I think, are dire because I've been wondering for years now why more and more Americans seem to reject nuance, right? Where you might identify with one political group, whether it be progressives or alt-right, whatever it is. If you happen to play devil's advocate or deviate even slightly from whatever the dominant narrative is with that political group, the dogpiling is insane, it's intense, and it certainly silences anyone who does want to have a detailed, nuanced discussion about real political issues that deserve that type of discussion.
So this piece is a giant blind spot that I want to get to in a second, but let me also talk about how brilliant it is before I get to its problems. So first of all, accurately assessing what's happening now, Republican politicians have already caught on. That's why Marjorie Taylor Greene, Matt Gaetz, Ted Cruz, they're all in every one of these micro topics on Twitter. They're harsher and harsher, and that's because they realize that's what the algorithm rewards, and that has gotten them more and more publicity and more fundraising from the grassroots. That's why Marjorie Taylor Greene in the first quarter of Congress, as a freshman congressperson, raised more money than anyone else in Congress did. So Republicans are smart enough to figure that out. Some of them, like Ted Cruz, are actually smart. He's got other problems, but he realized it, and the way he does it is super inauthentic, and you can tell. Others are just crazy, like Marjorie Taylor Greene, and the algorithm rewards crazy. So she didn't do it on purpose. She just was like, Jewish space lasers. The algorithm's like, ooh, that's getting a lot of attention, okay? A lot of outrage, that's good.
Right.
And it amps it up, right? She just called half the Republican Party pedophiles. That's an unbelievable, outrageous charge that pre-social media would have gotten you just demolished in politics, right?
That's true.
Right now, raising more money, more power. Why? Because that comment was outrageous, so everybody saw it. And by the way, traditional media, seeing all the likes, seeing all the shares, then thinks it's a hot topic because it's trending on Twitter. They pile on and then give extra publicity.
Exactly.
Okay,
yes.
So there's no question this phenomenon is real. There's no question that it's hurt the country. Now, it's not just that though. Then as he points out, look, there's nothing stopping other countries. You don't have to get obsessed about Russia. He says basically at some point, China's gonna figure this out if they haven't already figured it out. And it is so easy to divide America. You just create more and more outrage and get people to hate each other and fight against one another, and you destroy America from within. Kind of what's happening now, okay? So that's another world of hurt that's headed in our direction. And Anna, it's not just that the online Gestapo yells at you, which definitely happens.
Yeah, but it silences people.
But so that definitely silences people. But on top of that, even if you make a brilliant point and it's a nuanced, thoughtful point, it's not gonna cause outrage. So it's not gonna get as many shares.
Yeah.
It's not gonna get as many likes. It's not gonna get as many dislikes. You know, they used to reward the dislikes too. And that made things even worse, right? Because then when people really hate what you're saying, the algorithm rewarded it, right? So nuanced points are killed, outrageous points are elevated. So that's why the piece is brilliant and you should read it. And we're gonna, by the way, try to have him on the conversation. That's on at 5:30 p.m. Eastern, right before the Young Turks. You should always check that out right here on this channel. Okay, but now the loophole or the blind spot.
No, I'm not done. I want to get into more details of this because there's so many important details that we have to get to, because he also draws out the differences between the right and the left, and I think that he's accurate in describing both sides. And I think he's also, this is the part that actually, believe it or not, helped me breathe a sigh of relief, because if you're on Twitter or Facebook all day, it seems like the country is just full of lunatics. There's no one, for lack of a better word, I don't even want to say the middle, but no one cares about nuance. No one cares about, there are areas where we do need compromise. Sorry, right? Like that's how you decide on policy that actually does serve the best interests of people. But here's what he found. So he writes that the Hidden Tribe study by the pro-democracy group More in Common surveyed 8,000 Americans in 2017 and 2018 and identified 7 groups that shared beliefs and behaviors. The one furthest to the right, known as the devoted conservatives, comprised just 6% of the US population. The group furthest to the left, the progressive activists, comprised 8% of the population. The progressive activists were by far the most prolific group on social media. 70% had shared political content over the previous year. The devoted conservatives followed at 56%. So these two extreme groups are actually similar in surprising ways, he writes. They are the whitest and richest of the 7 groups, which suggests that America is being torn apart by a battle between 2 subsets of the elite who are not representative of the broader society. What's more, they are the 2 groups that show the greatest homogeneity in their moral and political attitudes. That part both is disturbing, but also a bit of a relief. Because these are the individuals who are on social media all day engaging in dogpiling toward anyone within their group who dares to deviate from whatever their preconceived notions are, whatever their dominant narrative is, and they're not representative of the overall population. That gives me a little bit of relief, but it's also a little concerning because what ends up resulting from this is bad policy. People are silenced And as a result, they're afraid to speak up, right? They're afraid of losing their jobs in some cases. If you say something that might be wrongly described as look, on the left, you see it a lot, right? If you question some of the reforms that are being carried out, for instance, by liberal prosecutors, oh, you're immediately racist. No, but we're seeing some negative impacts. Can we just have a calm conversation about it? We can debate it, that's totally healthy and fine, but people get silent. So what ends up happening is bad policy ends up getting passed with bad results. And then on the right, you see a more authoritarian nature, which we can get to in more detail in just a second. But Jake, go ahead.
So the fact about them being the wealthiest of the groups is also really important, guys. So on the right-wing side, that is why you never see the right wing actually talking about corporate corruption. We just did a story earlier in this show about Mo Brooks and how he said, yeah, special interest groups give us $1 million, that's how we become chairman, and then we do quid pro quo and we give them the money back. You never see them admit that, right? And so that's because their thought leaders are all rich. And so they don't want you to find out about corporate corruption. They're the ones doing corporate corruption. So that's why they'll be like, oh, populism, hate black people, hate Chinese for starting coronavirus. Corporations, well, I mean, if they're being fair to black people or gay people, we should hate them. But they're funneling them all the money to the corrupt politicians. Shush, 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 shush. And that's why you'll always see the thought leaders from the right wing tell you everything from a rich person's perspective. You know, that we need to encourage more risk taking. Where are you gonna put your $10 million? You know, you're like, what $10 million? Because that 6% is among the richest in the country. Now on the left, I remember when I said defund the police was a terrible slogan. I understand the idea. I appreciate that money has to be taken from parts of the police budget and put it into social services for specific reasons. But framing it as defund the police makes it look like you're getting rid of all police, and that is terrible framing because no average person thinks that we should get rid of all police. And I was shouted down, how dare you? And part of the reason I was shouted down is because it turns out it's mainly rich people and they don't have to worry about crime because they have so many cops in Beverly Hills. It's all theoretical to them. By the way, there's massive crime in Beverly Hills now. All of a sudden, the rich liberals in LA don't want to defund the police. They want to increase funding to the police, okay? So some of those stereotypes are true. You look at the polling, and it turns out African Americans don't want to defund the police. Latinos don't want to be called Latinx at all, at all. Right. It's a thing that was cooked up at Oberlin, and they think, oh no, everybody thinks like this. No, you guys are in a little bubble. People do not think like that. But do not put progressive economic policies in that same camp, and don't put actual fight for social justice in that camp. It's the extremes that are driving completely different conversations. Now, I gotta get to the blind spot. The blind spot is, he doesn't talk about the system that it replaced. And it almost makes it, he doesn't say it, but it almost makes it seem like the good old days. But there were no good old days. In the old days, it was just traditional media. And traditional media is totally corrupt, 100% corrupt. They never told you about any of the money in politics. They never told you about corporate interests. They still don't tell you, right? I don't want to go back to those old days. I like that we have broken down the walls. But yes, the first set of folks through the walls are zombies, okay?
Yeah, but Jake, you're seeing it. I disagree with your point of view here, because I think what you're missing is that the individuals who quote unquote broke the walls at the end of the day have what motivation? What drives them? What drives them? Profits, right?
Well, so, look, like, to be fair,
I think at this point, let me just finish my point. At this point, all of the garbage that we were sold in the early 2000s about how, oh, this is democratizing things and all. No, we're talking about extremely wealthy Silicon Valley executives who don't care about the polarization in the country. They're the ones who put this model together in the first place, not because they want to destroy the country, but because they want to make money. And what makes money for them? Selling our data, that's number one. But number two, keeping people engaged. How do you keep people engaged on these platforms? By shock and awe, by all sorts of jarring content. And I disagree in regard to, oh no, things are actually better. No, they're not better now. I agree that there might be a blind spot when it comes to like mass media, but this isn't a critique of like the press. This is a critique specifically of social media platforms, and I actually do think that they've made political discourse a lot worse.
So I was going to say, to be fair, most of the folks on the left that are on the quote unquote extreme end might be on the wealthier side, but they're not necessarily doing it for money. Some are. So I'll give you the examples of the ones that are. So there's a lot of minorities in media who think, oh, $15 minimum wage. No, I don't care. Support any Democrat, even if they vote against $15 minimum wage. Don't care. It's not important. No big deal. We hate it. Okay. Now, in reality, 47% of black people in this country make less than $15. It would affect their lives more than anyone else's life. But is that the #1 priority for elite so-called leftists? No, it's representation in media and business circles at the very highest end. Why? Because they want those jobs. So they're like, what do you mean? The top issue for minorities in the country is whether we're CEO or we're on-air host, right? The position is making millions of dollars. No, that's your top priority. And you don't represent all the people you claim to represent. So keep it real on that. But a majority of those progressives mean well, but they're caught up in a bubble where they genuinely think that defund the police is going to be a super popular idea. And if we just do it, oh my God, everything would be fixed. So, but I've never seen anyone argue, hey, take this stuff away, but hey, don't forget, we have to have something better, right? No, they all always say, let's go back to the way it was. And the way that it was so horrific that it made people so angry that it partly led to this.
I think that, first of all, it's a little bit of a mischaracterization of what he's advocating for, because there's a whole portion of his piece where he gives possible solutions. And he's not saying to do away with social media. He's saying to do away with the current model of these social media platforms that rewards bad behavior, right? The stuff that celebrates and promotes viral, jarring content. And I agree with him on that. There was a point in time where social media just wasn't this bad, where you could log on to Twitter. I remember early days of Twitter, we would log on, and that was where we would have news stories that wouldn't get covered in the mainstream press or the corporate media would get some visibility. Like, I remember the notorious filibuster that I believe Wendy Davis did in Texas in regard to their anti-abortion bill. There was like no coverage of that in corporate media. And then once it went viral on Twitter, that's when corporate media is like, all right, fine, I guess we'll cover it. I thought that was really interesting. Same thing with various uprisings that were taking place throughout the globe, certainly in some Middle Eastern countries. And then all of a sudden, through the tinkering that we saw by the decision makers over at Twitter, the stuff that we hate about that platform started to rise at the top.
Yeah, I hear you, but guys, it's so nuanced, ironically, right? And we're willing to have that conversation. So the reason why I say that is, remember, good guys can also cooperate online, and they could also have impact. To the point you made, Anna, Benjamin Crump was on this show. He's a lawyer for Trayvon Martin and so many other people who have been, the victims of injustice in this country. And he said if it wasn't for TYT, the Trayvon Martin story wouldn't have been anywhere near as big. Because our videos got so many views that mainstream media was like, oh, okay, I guess this is a hot topic. We will cover racial injustice. And then the police abuse stories have gone crazy viral because people never saw it before. If the civil rights movement had the smartphones that we have now, it would have made a giant difference, okay? So I like when things go viral as well. It depends, We've got to find a way to fix it, but I don't think it's shutting it down. And I know I'm very optimistic. And I also know the downsides, guys. The reason you don't hear the smart points is because it never made it into your feed, right? It's very similar to money in politics. People like idiots in mainstream media will be like, well, they had a debate of ideas, an exchange of ideas, and I guess the voters like that idea more. No, 9 out of 10 times they never even heard the progressive idea because the other guy had $10 million and the progressive had 20,000 bucks. They never even heard the good idea. And that's the same problem here. But on the other hand, I believe that in the long run, we're going to win, that we're going to make good ideas and actually liking each other and actually working towards justice and progress go more viral.
You just need to find people who have the balls to basically say what needs to be said, knowing that they're gonna be dogpiled on social media.
Ooh, that's what TYT is all about. We don't care, dogpile all you want, 6%ers and 8%ers. We don't care, we're gonna tell you the truth. And yes, the truth is nuanced. Thanks for watching The Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.